Today we're going to be looking at zeros from a graph. This is a problem that we worked on last class. The easiest way to find zeros from a trinomial is to go ahead and put that trinomial straight into your graphing calculator into y equals x squared minus 5x minus 6. When I am looking for the zeros, what I'm really looking for are the x values when y, which is right here, is 0, and it'll usually happen twice. Do you see in the table the x values when y is 0? If you said -1 and 6, you're correct. So how I did that was I looked for y was 0, and then the x values right there across are my answers. I know this says change in table, but those are your x values. So my answer would just be choice 1, -1 and 6. Let's say instead of looking at the table, I looked at the graph. There is a graph button on your calculator, so if you type this into your own app, hit graph on the top right and you'll be able to see this. It'll give you the graph of this function, which is called a parabola. Looks like the letter U, and I know the graph is small, but imagine that this would go on forever and ever. I can actually spot my solutions, -1 and 6, on the graph, and here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to look at my x-axis, and I'm going to look to see where my graph crosses over the x-axis. So that happens twice. Happens here and here. Knowing that this point in the middle is where the x and the y-axis cross, which is the origin, or 0, 0, where that's x and that's y, I can use that to find the coordinates of these 2 points here. So let's start with the positive one. If I start at 0 and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'll see that the x value is 6 there, which matches what I got in the table and in my answer. The coordinate of this point would be 6, 0, which makes sense because my answer is the x value when y is 0. Same thing in the other direction. Starting here, count backwards. So this made me move one space, but because I moved to the left, I'm going to have a negative number for my answer, so this would be x is -1. But just like this coordinate here, my answer is the x value when y is 0. So today we're going to be looking to see where your graph crosses the x-axis, and you can find your 2 answers that way, just like you could in the table. So let's look at 3 examples. I'm just looking to see where my graph crosses the x-axis. My 2 zeros, which is another word for my solutions, are going to be right here and here. So what are those solutions? Well, that's going to be +1 and +3. Now throw back to last class. If I wanted the factors, the key would be to just put your parentheses, put x, and switch the signs. The opposite of +1 would be -1. The opposite of +3 would be -3. So those are my 2 zeros. Those are my 2 factors. Let's try this again. What are my solutions? Well, in this case, there's 4 of them. They just give you the numbers there. -5, -2, 3, and 7. And my factors would just be the opposite of those. I can have 4 factors because I have 4 zeros, and I'm just switching the signs. So what would those 4 factors be? That would be the opposite of -5, which is +5, opposite of -2, which is +2, opposite of +3, -3, opposite of +7, -7. All right, let's look at another one. What would the zeros be? Well, if you don't know, that's because there are no zeros. So there are none. That's because the graph never actually crosses the x-axis. There's a space in between here. So there are just no solutions. There's actually no real solutions, but this curriculum only works in real solutions. So that means I have no factors as well for this one. So if your graph does cross the x-axis, you have solutions. If it doesn't, if there's a space in between, then you will just have no solutions. Let's look at another one. This one's not numbered for you, but remember the x-axis is just like a number line. So what would the two zeros be if this is the origin at 0, 0? So here's how you do that one. You can count forward 1, 2, 3, 4. So that x would be positive 4. And when you count backwards, 1, 2, x equals negative 2. So those would be your two zeros, negative 2 and 4. And what would my two factors be if you're switching the sign? It would be x plus 2 and x minus 4. Now there's something you can also get from looking at the graph, and that's going to be what's called your axis of symmetry. What do you think symmetry is based on these pictures? So symmetry just means you can cut it down the middle and it'll be the same on both sides. So for example, this heart, cut it in the middle, fold it on top of itself, and it'll be the same on both sides. So these are lines of symmetry. This happens in the real world. For example, butterflies have symmetry. Snowflakes have a few ways you can draw a line of symmetry. Do it like that. It's a little bit off. And when something is not the same on both sides, we call it asymmetric. But if it is the same on both sides, it's symmetric. It has symmetry. So parabolas have symmetry. I'm going to get rid of my drawings here. If I was to draw a line through my parabola, which x value does my axis of symmetry go through? What x value would that be? So that is going to be when x is 1. Let me make this as clear as I can. I draw a axis of symmetry. I'm just doing a dotted line. It's a little easier to draw. It goes right through the middle. That point is called the vertex. We'll talk more about that later. And then I'm looking to see what x value it goes through. And that would be when x is 1, because that's when x is 0. So an axis of symmetry is always going to be an x equals equation, because I'm looking for where my line goes through the x-axis. I technically don't even need this entire graph here to find out the axis of symmetry. I could just do this from my zeros. If I have my 0 at negative 2 and positive 4, I'm just looking for the number in the middle. And you might have done this while finding the median. You just cross off numbers on both sides until you get to the middle number, and just know that this is the x-axis, so it would be x is 1, which is what we got from there. So let's try another one. What would be the zeros for this parabola, knowing that that is the origin? So hopefully we got that the zeros would be 1, and if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 5. Usually when you list the zeros, you put the negative 1 first. And what would the factors be? So because you switch the sign, it'd be x plus 5 and x minus 1. And our new skill here, our axis of symmetry, I will draw that for you. What would be the axis of symmetry, knowing that it starts with x equals? So that's going to be x equals negative 2, because this is 0 and I count backwards 2 and I get x equals -2. I always go through that middle point. It's got to be the same on both sides, like a mirror. Let's try a Regents question. I'm not even going to read the whole thing. I see the words axis of symmetry, and I see my 2 zeros here, -3 and 5. I'll get you started here. I'll put my 2 zeros there, -3 and 5, and keep in mind that symmetry means the middle. So what would be my axis of symmetry, knowing that it starts with x equals? So here's how you do that one. Just cross off on both sides until you get to the number in the middle here. So I would get x equals 1. If you wanted to, you could make this look like an actual parabola. You don't have to. You just need to know where those 2 zeros are. Okay, let's try a multiple choice question. Which function has the zeros of -4 and 2? So here's how you do this one. Your 2 zeros are these 2 points right here and here, or here and here. This one, if this is 0, -2 and +4, this would be 1, 2, 3, -4 and +2. So just be careful with your signs. Choice 4 would be your answer. How many solutions, don't really worry about that. How many solutions does this equation have? You can check out the graph here. This is your parabola. So yeah, how many solutions? This would have no solutions. It has no solutions because this graph never actually touches the x-axis. There's a space in between here. So there's no zeros, no solutions. It doesn't cross through the x-axis. Okay, here's a weird looking one. Don't worry about that. It's just there to be weird. It's asking you, could the factors of this graph here be x plus 2 and x minus 3? And they want you to explain why or why not. This is easier than you think. First of all, we need to remember what it looks like to solve for the factors without our graphing calculator. If you remember, we had our factors, and then we had our t-chart, and then we just reversed our signs. So if my factor is x plus 2, what would my actual solution be? It'd be -2. And if my factor is x minus 3, my solution would be +3. So I want to know, do these zeros match with this graph here? So I just look at the zeros, just one right there and one right there. If this is 0, I just have to count backwards and I get -2, +3. So these do indeed match those zeros. So I'm going to say yes, because the zeros are -2 and 3. And you can mention that you found that on the graph and that you got the zeros using inverse operations or anything like that. So make sure you have some kind of sentence explaining what the zeros are, and you would get full credit. Okay, let's have you try one on your own. How many real number solutions does 4x squared plus 2x plus 5 equals 0 have? Keep in mind that I have already graphed this for you, so how many solutions do you see? There are actually no solutions. None, because yes, this graph never actually touches the x-axis. So we will go with no solutions because it does not touch the x-axis. Okay, here's one that gives you choices that are a bunch of factors, and they want to know which set of factors matches these zeros. So I'm going to go ahead and do the first one for you. So if I look here, my 0 right there is -3, And if my 0 is -3, my factor is just going to be x with the sign switched. So the opposite of -3 would be +3. So if my 0 is -3, my factor is x plus 3. So I'm looking for choices that have x plus 3 in it. And that's only choices 1 and 3. So I would eliminate any choice that doesn't have that. So why don't you pick between choices 1 and 3 based on the other two zeros. So I'm just switching my sign. The opposite of +2 is x minus 2, which is right here. And the other one would be x minus 4, which is right here. You might say, like, wait a minute, this choice has them too, but, like, what's with that 5? There is no 0 there at +5, so my answer would be choice 1. You could have also eliminated choices 3 and 4 right away, just seeing, like, oh, there's only 3 zeros, and this has 4 factors. All right, let's do another one. The question itself, again, doesn't really mean too much. You can go right to the bottom where the choices are. They're just telling you, actually do kind of need this part, what A is, what B is, and what C is. So I'm going to help you out here. So it says A is at -2, 0, which is right here. So that's going to be point A. B is at 0, -4. So that would be right here. And C is at 4, 0. So right there. Which of these points can determine the zeros of the equation? So which of these 3 points are the zeros? So remember, zeros happen where your graph touches the x-axis. So the only points that touch the x-axis are point C and point A. So it would be C and A only. And that is choice 3. Okay, let's try this one. First thing we want to do is state the zeros of the function. Oh, it's not above. It's to the left. So what are the 3 zeros for this function? That would be -2, +1, and +3. And explain what zeros are. So zeros are the x values when y equals 0. Or y is 0. The factors. I'll do the first factor for you. If my 0 is x minus 2, my factor would be x plus 2. What are my other 2 factors? It's x minus 1 and x minus 3. Okay, let's try another one. Given these factors, could those factors be based on this graph here? Well, let's see. If you remember, we just want to switch the signs. So those are my 2 factors. My zeros would be -1 and +5. I'm going to go to my graph. My zeros are -5 and +1. So I could say no. The zeros on the graph are -5 and 1. So, okay. Given these zeros, -7 and -1, what is the equation of the axis of symmetry? Remember, we want to find the number in the middle. So if these are 2 zeros, -7 and 1, which number is in the middle? You just want to cross off from both sides. Find that -4 is in the middle. If this was an actual graph, you'd see a parabola, something like that. Okay, one more. Which function has the zeros positive 2, and negative 3. Well, you can get rid of choice 1 because it looks like those are both negative, so get rid of that. I'm looking at choice 2. That's negative 3. That's positive 2. And choice 3, that's negative 2, positive 3. So just being careful of my signs. Looks like I'm going to go with choice 2. So that is the end of our lesson. Just let me know what you thought.